Buddy. It's great to be here with you on this evening of gorgeous October 9th. Welcome to the Housing Equity Candidate Forum of Washington's 45th Legislative District. Thank you to both candidates Springer and Demyan for being here, and to everyone watching. This forum is presented by the Coalition of Immigrants, Refugees, and Communities of Color, and the Eastside Housing Equity Coalition, which includes Indian American Community Services, Eastside for All, and the Housing Development Consortium, and the Muslim Community Network Association. We'll be sharing information in the chat for those who want to learn more about the organizations that sponsored this forum, as well as the candidates who are with us this evening. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ivana Dagala. I have been lucky enough to call the Pacific Northwest home and the Eastside home for the last 7 to 10 years. I'll say 10 in the Pacific Northwest and 7 in the Eastside. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I serve my communities by serving on a board of Leadership Eastside, an organization that has a vision actually to create thriving and equitable communities where leadership issues are met with collaboration and shared responsibility. I also serve on the Bellevue Diversity Advisory Network, which advises the City of Bellevue's City Manager's Office and staff. I would now like to get started and let you know that I'll be posing some questions to each candidate, alternating answers depending on who gets chosen first for the questions that they come. The questions have been curated by the event organizers based on issues that their communities have prioritized. We ask that candidates stay within the response time limits for each question. These limits range from 1 to 2 minutes. This is not a debate, so there will be no rebuttals. For those who are watching, we invite you to share your takeaways from tonight with your families and friends. So let's begin with introductions from both of our candidates. You will each have 60 seconds, starting with candidate Demyan. Please share a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for office at this time.
Absolutely. Hello, and thank you all so much for showing up, and thank you so much to the hosts for having us. My name is Melissa Demyan. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a union organizer with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. I'm really honored to be here today, and I want to start by sharing that I was adopted. My parents, they didn't know they were going to be parents. I came home in a laundry basket. But within 24 hours, our community rallied around my family. We had everything we would need, food, clothes, a bassinet. So I grew up knowing the incredible privilege that I have in this community and having resources. And I want to make sure that everyone has access to those resources and that we are lifting each other up. So that's one of the reasons that I'm running, and I'm excited to get to know all of you more today as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Demyan. Candidate Springer, we'd love to hear a little bit about you too.
All right. Thank you, Yvonne, and thanks to the consortium of organizations that are putting this together. Much appreciated. I am a lifelong resident of the Eastside, born and raised here. Spent 11 years on the Kirkland City Council, 4 as mayor, and then 10 terms in the legislature. Yvonne, I'm especially proud of the work we did to create Leadership Eastside. I was the founding board member of Leadership Eastside and helped write the very first curriculum, and my wife was a member of the first graduating class. So Leadership Eastside is an integral part of the community. We need more organizations like that. I think my leadership in the caucus is going to be much needed in the year to come. So I'm looking forward to getting back down to Olympia and continuing the hard work around housing policy.
Well, thank you both for your introductions. We'll go to the opening question. And this question comes from the organizers of the event, who recognize that housing is a top priority across all the communities that they support. And this includes the people who are unhoused, those who receive higher incomes, and who are financially strained, and also the cost burdened. So we're experiencing a region that's rapidly growing, and the housing crisis with its implications for housing affordability and access are questionable. We would like to ask you, we're soon going to get into some specific policy questions, but speaking more broadly, what would you say to individuals and families impacted by the housing crisis who want to know how your leadership will help them? And each of you will have 2 minutes to respond, and we'll start with candidate Springer.
All right, Yvonne, thanks again. I'm a member of my caucus's leadership team. I've been the deputy majority leader for the last decade or so. In that role, it is my responsibility to work through some very thorny issues around particular bills. I'm often the one in our caucus that leadership goes to sit down with the advocates for controversial bills that are difficult to get passed to try to find a path forward. I am successful sometimes and sometimes not. But it is the experience that I bring that I think is sorely needed, particularly in the upcoming session. I saw some numbers today that indicate that over 3/4 of the legislature, and my caucus in particular, will have been in Olympia 6 years or less. That's a very, very inexperienced legislature. And with the budget issues that we may be facing, my experience on the fiscal committees, which are critical to funding the housing policy that we pass, is going to be sorely needed. I'm one of 3 people in the House that was actually here when the legislature faced the recession, the Great Recession of 2009, when we had to cut $9 billion out of a $36 billion budget. There is a great deal of uncertainty with regard to our budget and fiscal health going into this session. The initiatives that are out there will have a lot to do with that. And there's precious little experience in dealing with those kinds of budget issues in our caucus, and I'm one of them, and I think that's the leadership that is going to be sorely needed.
Thank you for your response, candidate Springer. And now to you, candidate Demyan.
Thank you. What I would say to those folks is, I'm living this myself. My husband and I, earlier this year, we tried to buy a house. We were approved for a loan of up to $800,000, and our mortgage, if we had not been beat out by all cash offers, would have been over $6,000 a month. Our rent, as it is over $3,000 a month. I am living this crisis, and I can speak to the urgency of the issue, and I'm ready and prepared to act. Unfortunately, Representative Springer has been a passive observer of progress at best on some of these issues. He's certainly not been a champion like Representative Bateman when she organized to pass the updated zoning legislation. There are several bills that Representative Springer has held up progress on or did not support, including amending the Residential Landlord Tenant Act to increase tenant protections, removing barriers to construction of ADUs in urban growth areas, increasing the time tenant has to pay or vacate for eviction proceedings from 3 to 14 days. He voted no on all of these pieces of legislation and more. So I think it's time that we have an organizer in Olympia who is willing and ready to roll up their sleeves and get the work done, to meet with the stakeholders, to talk with everyone involved, and not just those on the financing side, but also on the tenant side, and to bring parties together. And that's what I am prepared to do. And, I as an organizer, my job is to listen. It's to be in the community and to bring those voices of those who are struggling to Olympia. Because this campaign isn't about me, it's about all of us organizing together to get the big stuff done, to help address the housing crisis. And I think we need more young people and more renters in the legislature to make that happen.
Thank you for your response, candidate Demyan. Now I'd like to go to our second question, which is around renter protections. And turning to specific approaches and solutions, our next question will be addressing the concerns of many renters about being priced out of their homes with each rent increase. House Bill 2114 was introduced in 2024 to provide residential renters and manufactured homeowners with protections against excessive rent increases. Specifically, this bill advanced out of the Washington House with a 7% cap on annual rent increases. Would you support rent stabilization? Would you support a rent stabilization bill in 2025? And if so, what provisions would you want to see in a bill and why? And we'll have a 90 seconds to respond to this question, and we're going to start with candidate Demyan.
Right. Yes, I would support rent stabilization. And you know what, when I talk about living this, my husband and I, we get gray hair. You know, I'm 33. Every year in February, I start seeing more and more gray hairs because we're thinking about and we're wondering and we're stressing and we're losing sleep over how much our rent is going to increase. And this is an issue. How are you supposed to plan and budget when you're not sure how much your rent is going to go up by? And I think it's important that we pass tenant protections that include rent stabilization. I also think we should extend rent stabilization to small businesses because I've talked with a lot of small business owners who are dealing with the same anxiety when their contract comes up for renewal. So as an organizer, you know, I'm learning and I'm listening and I want to hear from more organizations around what provisions we need. The short answer, because I'm looking at the time, is that yes, I do support a rent stabilization bill. The specifics, I want to make sure that we have voices at the table when we're hammering out the deal and making that negotiation. And, you know, for me, that's important. And yes, I support rent stabilization.
Thank you for your response, candidate Demyan. And now we'll go to you, candidate Springer. You also have 90 seconds to respond.
So the rent stabilization bill that passed the House in 2024, I voted for that bill. And I specifically voted for that bill because they made a change in the bill from the year before. And that was to recognize the financing obligations that landlords have when they build new multifamily housing. And they extended a sort of a safe haven, if you will, from the bill for the first 10 years of financing for a brand new multifamily housing development. That was necessary in order to get those kinds of developments built. Otherwise, you can't get financing. So that was something that I worked on with the Rental Housing Association and the Low Income Housing Alliance. I was in several rooms with the two of those groups, hammering out that kind of language. And it was successful in the House. It was not in the Senate. I assume it will be back again this next year. I would certainly hope so. And it's a matter of going over to the Senate and trying to get them to understand how important the bill is, but what the protections are that are in it. And hopefully we'll be more successful in the Senate side. I think primarily they ran out of time because it was really late in session. But I hope the bill is back. I expect it to be.
Thank you for your response, candidate Springer. Our next question follows up on that, and we know that the state legislature has enacted tenant protections against evictions and discrimination over the last several years, including just cause termination and right to counsel for low-income tenants. Some of these protections have been recently attacked for contributing to the eviction court backlogs and the operational challenges in housing. So will you continue to support these tenant protections? And how will you ensure effective functioning of the right to counsel? And each of you again have 90 seconds to respond, and we'll start with candidate Springer for this question.
I found the mute button. Yeah, those tenant protections are important. I support those. I think there's no question that tenants should have the right to counsel. The issue that had come up, as you had mentioned, Yvonne, was the court backlog. One of the things the legislature needs to address is our backlog of cases throughout our criminal justice system, not just tenant issues, although that is a big one. And we need to fund the administrative office of the court at a higher level than we have in the past. They seem to be, I'm not sure why, but they seem to be last on everybody's list when it comes time for what are your priorities to fund. It's not a particularly, it's not a big sexy topic that people get all wrapped up about because it doesn't mean anything to you unless you're in it. And so trying to advocate for people who actually need that protection when people are also advocating for funding for special ed in our K-12 system, those become false choices that I hope we don't have to, that we can get away from. So I think the key there is adequate funding that increases the number of administrative law judges, essentially, and you can move these cases through faster and make sure that tenants have a right to counsel. So makes sense to me.
Thank you for your response, candidate Springer. What about you, candidate Demyan? We'd love to hear your response, and you two have 90 seconds to respond.
Yes, and this question is really important and you know, also something I'm familiar with. So, you know, if let's say you put down your security deposit and you know, you're about to move out and you know, the landlord wants to take your security deposit. You for something like standard cleaning that's already included. Where do you go? You know, that's illegal. They can't just take it, but what do I do? Who am I supposed to talk to? How do I fight this? You know, you can call the tenants union. You can try to work with a nonprofit. You need money to have an attorney. So we have all these great laws, you know, in terms of how you can use security deposits, but we don't have a system of where you can go to help. So, you know, ideally, we shouldn't have to go to court with all of these issues. The state could try to mediate some of this by telling the landlord what they're trying to do is illegal. You know, we could have a service for landlords that serves as both a hotline for tenants and for landlords, an enforcement mechanism and mediation. And, you know, the Supreme Court, they have a court case right now regarding public defenders, and that's people's lives and whether or not they're going to go to prison. And so with a mediation process, you know, hopefully we can have some deferral of needing as many attorneys. But ultimately, as Representative Springer said, we need funding because you can't have a right to counsel without lawyers. So I think this is twofold. I'd love to see a service that we can provide for tenants. And also, I think we need more funding.
Right. Thank you for your response. Our next topic is going to be around housing equity. For the first time ever, cities are required to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments of the population. This includes emergency housing, shelters, and permanent supportive housing as outlined in House Bill 1220. Despite these requirements, some jurisdictions continue to restrict or reject the setting of this housing. In 2023, lawmakers proposed Housing Accountability Act, House Bill 2113, which would create a builder's remedy for affordable housing, restricting ability of a city or a county to deny a proposed affordable housing development. California has had a similar law since 1990. The question is, would you support implementing a builder's remedy in Washington? And are there other accountability measures for cities that you support? And for this question, you will both, again, each have 90 seconds to answer. And we're going to start with candidate Demyan.
Yes, thank you. So I think, again, we need to create enforcement mechanisms for the state when we pass these laws, because the law isn't any good if it's not being enforced. So, you know, I think we can consider the right of action, the private right of action, or, you know, we could give the AG authority, but we need a enforcement mechanism here. So when the state passes minimum standards, there isn't anything that we can do. So I do think we do need a builder's remedy. But right now there isn't that enforcement mechanism in place. So I would be open to having the AG have authority to go after cities and counties that aren't following state laws. And another thing that I want to talk about is HOA laws. I think we need to do work in terms of making sure that HOAs aren't superseding state law. There's more I can say about this. I'm realizing I have 30 seconds left. And I think it's important that, yes, I support it. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. It's been a very long day, friends.
That's okay, and that's understandable, but we appreciate your answer. Candidate Springer, we're now going to you. You two have 90 seconds to answer the question.
So yes, there should be a builder's remedy. There also should be accountability standards for jurisdictions, particularly cities that don't meet their obligations to allow for affordable housing. And I think we're going to see conflicts, more conflicts than we have in the past, because now those housing targets have to meet certain levels of affordability. The state has had the enforcement mechanism in place for a long time for cities that have been remiss in meeting their obligations. It's just politically been very, very difficult to actually exercise it. And that remedy has been our ability to withhold real estate excise tax revenues. Even sales tax could be on the table. That's sort of like the really big hammer that no one really wants to use, because you end up hurting a lot of people that don't deserve it. The AG's office, I think, has a role to play here. I think what's key is empowering the AG's office to determine the degree to which a city, for example, is out of compliance. And then the legislature should set some parameters on what the remedies should be, or the punishments should be, if you will. And then the AG would be in a position to enact those.
Thank you for your response, Candidate Springer. Our next topic focuses on funding. Developers need public subsidies like the Housing Trust Fund to build housing that is affordable for low-income people. While the state increased funding for affordable housing over the past few budgets, there's still no dedicated fund source for the Housing Trust Fund. And we understand that we're going into a difficult budget year. So what are your specific commitments to scaling up investments in affordable housing? And do you support new dedicated funding tools at the state level? Please be as specific as you possibly can, and you will each have 2 minutes to respond to this question, and we will begin with Candidate Springer.
This is always the key question that the legislature has to grapple with. We don't build housing. We don't have the wherewithal to do that. What we do is we try to fund other people to build housing. We call that public-private partnerships. There needs to be the recognition that in order to build the amount of housing that we need over the next decade or so, at all levels of affordability, will absolutely require that the private sector be a major player in that development. They build 80 to 85% of all housing. And without their help, we don't get to the 1.2 million units that we need in the next decade or so. So we have to engage with the private sector. We can do that through tax policy, tax incentives. That works to some degree. We also can work with our philanthropic organizations. And we, the 45th District is blessed in the sense that we have some of the best corporate citizens around who are willing to step up. I will use Grata, an apartment complex that just opened in Totem Lake. I helped cut the rhythm there a month or so ago. It's 125 units, all affordable at 50% or less of AMI. That was not possible until Amazon stepped up. So we need to emphasize our ability to work with the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world, which we have here in the 45th District. There's another one coming on board in Totem Lake called Polaris. It's going to be for veterans, 125 units at 30 to 50% of area median income. So it can be done. It just takes partnerships to do it.
Great. Thank you for your response, Candidate Springer. Candidate Demyan?
Yes, this is an incredibly important question. And, the state absolutely needs to do more in terms of investing in affordable housing. Look, we need to diffuse the burden of building as widely as possible so that no one corner has to rapidly change too much. But what that means is we have to use every tool in our toolbox. So that means looking to public-private partnerships, public investment, ADUs. We have to look at reforming zoning and building codes. I think about this in a couple different buckets. So first we have the zoning and reducing the requirements needed to build, to make it easier for builders to want to come in, to incentivize them to come in. And then, in terms of financing investment, I'm open to all possibilities. I think, we should look at a state bank to help with financing, tax exemptions. I think we need social housing. I think looking to community land trusts like El Centro de la Raza is a great example of areas where this can work. And we need new funding sources. Representative Springer voted against the REIT tax. I think that is an area where we need to continue to push and pass new funding sources to invest in affordable housing. The last thing I'll say, I think there's some really innovative options in terms of accessing government debt capacity and using that rent at higher ends of the spectrum to borrow and help finance for the lower end of the spectrum. Look, I think we need to be innovative, we need to be smart, and we need to look towards the future because it's going to take everything in our toolbox. We need at least 200,000 affordable housing units in the next 10 years just to remain stagnant. And that doesn't address all of the people and our unhoused neighbors who are currently on the streets. So definitely have to do more.
Thank you, Candidate Demyan. We're now going to turn to the questions around housing supply and abundance. Washington has a deep housing shortage and needs an abundance of new housing to support workers, immigrants, and new families. A key way to address this shortage is to allow more homes to be built in more places through reforms to restrictive, outdated zoning rules. In the past few sessions, the state legislature has passed laws such as House Bill 1110 that requires cities to allow middle housing types in residential neighborhoods, and House Bill 1337, the accessory dwelling unit bill. However, many local jurisdictions continue to restrict multifamily homes in neighborhoods or lack the resources or political will to address housing issues at scale. Do you believe the state should do more to allow for abundant housing? And what specific additional state-level actions on land use would you support? You will each have 90 seconds to answer this question, and we'll begin with candidate Demyan for this.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think we absolutely need to do more. I think I had already started talking about this in the last question, but I think Bateman's bill offering REIT rebates for increased housing capacity if cities legalize more is a good step. I think there's also talk of legislation that gives cities money to incentivize a sixplex. One thing that I've experienced personally is we have folks at both ends of the spectrum here in need of housing. So we have people who are trying to buy a first home, and then we also have a lot of seniors who are aging in place. And so, I think we need to also look at multi-generational housing and how can we help to take some of the housing that currently exists and convert it for multiple families. And part of that does have to do with looking at HOAs and some of the restrictions that are placed on property owners. But, it is an all of the above approach. We do need to do more to build more housing. And in terms of restrictions on land, there's 5 seconds left. So I think we have to do more. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Demyan. And now to you, candidate Springer. You also have 90 seconds to answer this question.
I think the legislature has recognized that more does need to be done in terms of providing for housing abundance, as you put it. It's a word I'm going to adopt that word. I like it. The state has the ability to supersede some local regulatory schemes by doing what we call a programmatic EIS, programmatic environmental impact statement. Environmental impact statements take months and months and sometimes years. We should be doing them ahead of a proposed development so that the EIS for a proposed development is already in place and makes it faster and easier and quicker to develop. We also need to look at our building codes to see where they are too restrictive. One of the ones that I think is going to come up in the next year or so is around the idea of converting commercial buildings to residential buildings. It's being done elsewhere in the country. We've looked at it here. People are beginning to consider it. Just as an example that the state needs to address is the building code requiring staircases. We have a code that requires 2 staircases. If you reduce that to 1 and provide sufficient safety, you now can convert commercial buildings. So it's those kinds of decisions that we have to really work on.
Thank you, Candidate Springer. Staying on the same topic of solving Washington State's housing crisis, it's going to require deep commitments to building new homes and at a range of income levels and a various range of income levels and income types. We also have to maintain and operate housing after it's built. As we see insurance premiums and other operational costs rise, housing providers have identified the critical need for more operational support to sustain affordable housing that has already been built. So how will you work to support existing affordable housing operations and capital funding needs? For this question, you will both have 60 seconds to answer, and we'll begin with Candidate Springer.
You mentioned insurance. I think that is going to be a really key focus point for the legislature in the years to come, particularly in the next 2 years. Insurance costs are skyrocketing out of sight. There are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are understandable, some of them are not. We will have a new insurance commissioner. Don't know who that will be, but that office has a role to play in terms of trying to make our insurance premiums at least reasonable. There are additional funding sources that we've talked about over the years that I have actually supported. And those include the capital gains tax. That includes an employer high income earner tax that employers pay, as well as a wealth tax. And I support all of those as they are progressive tax measures, 2 of which we do not have now and would be really useful as dedicated sources.
Okay. Thank you, Candidate Springer. And Candidate Demyan, you also have 60 seconds to answer this question. We go to you now.
Yes. So I think what's really important, and I mentioned at the beginning, I've been, as a constituent, disappointed in Representative Springer and some of his lack of leadership on various pieces of legislation. I am incredibly impressed with Representative Bateman, who is an organizer at heart, because she met with every person who asked to take a meeting. She did everything needed to pass her piece of legislation that was so important and came at such an important time. Organizing is how you get big stuff done. When there is a problem with a piece of legislation or there are stakeholders who feel like they haven't been heard, it takes an organizer to meet with every person, to push through those barriers and to negotiate a good deal. And so what I will bring to this is an organizer's frame of mind. I will push until we get the job done. And that is my commitment.
Thank you, Candidate Demyan. And I'd like to thank both of you for your thoughtful responses tonight. And for the closing statements, can you each please share why you believe you're the best choice for voters in the district, especially those who are experiencing lack of housing stability? For this question, we'll give each of you 2 minutes, and we'll start with Candidate Demyan.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you, Yvonne, and Guillermo, and everyone who's helped to facilitate tonight. and especially everyone who's taken time to attend. You know, decisions are made by those who show up. So thank you for being civically active and for hearing and engaging on these issues. I have very much like my parents, when they didn't know they were going to be parents. I did not know that I was going to run for this position at the beginning of this year. But as I learned more about Representative Springer's voting record and some of the decisions that he's made on various pieces of legislation, and pieces of legislation that I've lobbied him on myself, it became clear that there's a pattern. And I believe that it's time for new leadership. And I think that it's important that we have more perspectives in Olympia. We don't have a renters caucus in the state of Washington in our legislature. And so that's one of the things that I hope to do, is to be a voice for people who rent. I have formed a coalition of supporters that I am just so incredibly honored to be a part of and to organize with. We have the sole endorsement of the Democratic Party, of the Washington State Labor Council, of the Seattle Building Trades. We have endorsements from Planned Parenthood, the National Women's Political Caucus. We have endorsements from APACE and AMAC and Lead Locally, and Jane Fonda and Working Families Party have endorsed our campaign. Down ballot races matter, and your local representatives set the tone. And I think that it's very important that we have organizers and people who understand the urgency and can speak to these issues. And I believe that I'm candidate, and I very humbly ask for your support in this election. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Demyan. And now we'll go to you, candidate Springer.
Thanks, Yvonne, and again, thanks to all of you for attending and those of you who are watching online. The passing legislation is a nitty-gritty job. It's not easy. It's painful. Sometimes it's emotional. And it takes a steady hand. It takes someone with experience. It takes someone who can actually sit down with entities on both sides of a question and hammer out a compromise. That's what I do in Olympia. And I'll give you a few examples. I was able to pass 20 years ago, the first improvement to the Landlord-Tenant Act for mobile home parks, because I got mobile home park owners together and the Low Income Housing Alliance and Columbia Legal Services together in the room all at once, and we worked out a bill 20 years ago. I also was a key negotiator in passing the fossil fuel-free energy production bill that requires all energy produced in Washington to be fossil-free by 2040. That would not have passed had I not brought some of the oil industry and the energy company into the room. We also have a paid family medical leave bill that I was a chief negotiator for, that brought business and labor together to pass a landmark paid family leave bill. We have a plastic bag ban in Washington state, and the reason we have that is because about 4 or 5 years ago, on the last 3 days of a session, I made sure that the paper mill people brought their CEOs to town, and we sat out in the lobby and we worked out a deal. That's what I do. I am often tasked with solving very intractable problems that come up through legislation. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thank you both, candidates Demyan and Springer. We really appreciate you taking your time to come here and allow an opportunity for our communities to hear from you. Thank you both. So before we conclude, we'd actually like to take a little time to hear from the audience participating on Zoom. Ultimately, this is an educational forum about all of you in the community. Housing is a personal issue to everyone, and it shapes our lives and the lives of our loved ones. In a moment, we will share a poll for our Zoom attendees with 4 brief questions to help us reflect on what we've heard tonight, and to give the candidates a little information about the community members who are here tonight. After you, our audience, answer these questions, we will read back the results and conclude. Let's launch the poll. Okay, I think we're close to done. Are we ready to share the results?
Yvonne, yes, the results should be shared now. Let me know if you don't see them.
Okay, I'm not there. I see them. Sorry. All right. Let's go through the results for the poll that we just took of our audience. The first question was, did you learn something today that will help you with your voting? Or are you not a voter? Or if you're not a voter of the 45th district, did you learn something that you can share with others who are in the 45th? As you can see, the results from our poll were an astounding 100% for that first question. Question number 2 was, have you or someone you know experienced a rent increase over 7% recently? And we had 11% say no and 89% say yes. Question number 3 was, have you or someone that you know had to move due to high housing costs in the last 2 years? And 22% said no, while 78% said yes. The fourth question is, do you or someone you know live outside the city where you work primarily due to high housing costs and unavailability of housing near your job? And for this question, wow, 100% said yes. So, thank you, audience, for your participation. We really appreciate everything that you shared with us this evening. So in conclusion, we again would like to thank both candidate Springer and candidate Demyan for joining us. For more information about our candidates, please visit their campaign web pages that will be listed in the chat. You can also connect with the co-hosting organizations whose information will also be posted in the chat. We'd like to thank our co-hosts and sponsors, the Eastside Housing Equity Coalition and the Coalition of Immigrants, Refugees, and Communities of Color. If you're eligible to vote but have not yet registered, you have until October 28th to register online or by mail. And you have until 8 p.m. on election day, November 5th, to register in person at the county elections office. Please see the information posted in the chat for this. We encourage you to share something you learned tonight with at least one other person that you know. Thank you, and this wraps up our forum for tonight. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you for being here with us this evening.